Welcome to The Hats. The Hats is a weekly podcast hosted by licensed marriage and family therapist and author Melissa Dumaz and attorney and business owner Kerri Harper-Howie. Listen in for practical tips on how to keep your hats upright, how to handle life when one of your hats gets lopsided, and plenty of real-life solutions to help you balance the many hats you wear daily.
Hello, Hatters, and welcome back to the Hats Podcast. I am your co-host, Melissa Dumaz, and I'm here today with my co-host.
Hi, Hatters. Kerri Harper-Howie. I'm glad to be back with you again.
Thank you so much for being here, Hatters. Today we are talking about the risk-taking hat. And I don't even know if there's a rhyme or reason or how we came up with this episode, but what's coming up for me the most is there's no way that we are in a season talking about being boss babes, boss bitches, that we are not talking about taking a risk. And so the risk-taking hat just seems so relevant and so important. And how do we get through a season of talking about being a boss without talking about without talking about taking risk?
It's impossible.
Yeah.
It's not a conversation that you can have without understanding that being a boss necessitates risk-taking.
Yeah.
However scary or however intimidating that might be, you're not going to achieve what I think we would both agree as boss status if you're not willing to take a leap every now and then.
Absolutely. Can be scared. I mean, you can be scared, but you got to do it anyway.
Yes.
So, Kerri, let's dive right into it. Tell us, what is the biggest risk you've ever taken, and how did it change you regardless of the outcome? That deep breath. Did you hear that? Ooh, it's about to be good. I need some popcorn.
This is a lot of pressure. I think what comes up for me most is putting this podcast out. It felt very intimidating. And I remember when we first launched it right in the middle of COVID, I was sending a link to one of our first episodes out to friends. And one of my friends said, "Congratulations." And I was like, "For what?" And I was like, "We don't have any listens yet." And she was like, "Just putting yourself out there is more than what many people are doing." And I acknowledged to her, it's terrifying. Hatters, you already know, Melissa definitely knows, I suffer from imposter syndrome all the time. And it makes me think, question, wonder, is anybody going to be interested? Is anyone going to download this? Am I going to make mistakes? Am I going to trip over my words? It feels like a risk to just put yourself out there in such a public way. And I'm not shy. I would describe myself as an extrovert. So I don't mind being publicly facing, publicly engaging, but to presume that you have things to say that people are actually interested in is a tremendous risk for me. So that's probably one of the biggest ones. And that's what came up immediately. The other one that I'll say, which, I certainly talk about in my book, is taking the leap from being a lawyer where I was very comfortable, loved my job, had a great boss, had great compensation, benefits, all the things, was feeling like I like to feel like an expert. I felt like an expert, felt like I was delivering value add to my clients. I really had a sweet gig. And then to leap into my family franchising business, which was fraught with a tremendous amount of fear, concern. It felt like a risk. Am I risking my family's business success, which at that point had been going on for 3 decades? Am I risking a career in law? You leave law. Am I going to be able to come back to it if I need to? I am risking my family's stability because I took a literal 70% pay cut. Am I risking our ability to pay our mortgage? Am I risking family relationships? Because when you work together in a family business, the best relationships can turn sour sometimes. So for me, that was a massive professional shift that had the potential to also bleed into being a personal risk. So it just, both of those things have been, I would say, some of the biggest risks. And how did they change me? I'll say, in putting this podcast out, it has changed it's changed our relationship, which I just consider to be such a fundamental blessing in my life. It has changed my belief and my capacity to say something that someone might be interested in, as we've seen our downloads, not necessarily skyrocket, but they have consistently grown and expanded. It has opened up a door for me to talk to people, one, to just send recommendations. People say, I'm struggling with this. I'm like, we talked about it. I'll send you an episode of our podcast. And I believe in what we're saying and what we're sharing. I wouldn't do it if I didn't. And to have people reflect that back to us, it's been so rewarding in moments when people have said, and I shared this with Melissa last week, one of my professional colleagues that I wasn't thinking about this. I walked into a room and she's like, I've been listening to you all day. And I was like, did I like pocket dial her? Like, I was like, I just got here. She's like, no, I'm ahead her now. And it just warmed my heart and spirit. So it has changed in the way that I feel like I move through the world with a level of confidence that I didn't necessarily have before. And clearly, there have been so many blessings for me in joining my family business, but I could give you a list in terms of relationship with my sister, professional opportunities, but one of the things that I think stands out most is those conversations early on with my husband and him supporting me in doing this and saying, "What have you ever done that you've not done well?" Reminding me that this was a risk worth taking, that and it wasn't just, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, just kind of like jumping out by the seat of my pants and doing whatever, but that I was taking a very smart and calculated risk. And so I think it brought us closer in ways that, I wasn't necessarily expecting. So, it's that has changed our marital relationship. It's changed the way that I kind of move professionally. Both of those risks have changed me in so many positive ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be here on the other side and to see your growth has been amazing. I remember when you were going into the family business and you had concern like my mom is welcoming me, my sister is welcoming me, but the franchise has to welcome me. Like there's levels to this that I have to like pass and go beyond. And then I remember some of those milestones. You'd be like, all right, let's get together. We're gonna celebrate. Like I passed or I got past this point or I did well here. And I don't remember all the names of all of those different milestones, but I do remember those like celebratory moments. And of course I remember those moments within the podcast. We were like, Mel, who's gonna listen to us? And I was like, girl, if you say that one more time, we're gonna fight.
We
Like,
never fought,
we never fought.
fortunately.
Yes. And the wild thing to me too is we talked about this Hatters in previous episodes. Like the Hats podcast was Kerri's idea. Like from the premise to her inviting me to join, she was like, "Oh, Mel would be great. Let's do it." The name, and then us like brainstorming that, and then and then after all of that hard work, for her to be like, "Well, who's gonna listen to us?" Well, we're past that now. Like we're in it. We are in it. We have gone to a training on podcasting. We've invested. Like I don't know who's gonna listen, but we're in it.
We're doing it.
We're doing it.
Let's go.
Yeah, and here we are. We're still doing it. Season 9. Let's
Yay.
go.
Season 9.
So yes, definitely a risk. And you bring up such a good point that whenever we put ourselves out there, it is a risk. And some people do it without thinking about the risk because they're just like, oh well, like YOLO, and they just take that leap. And then some people do it and they calculate the risk. Some people do it where they take the leap, but then they also ensure that they have an umbrella
Yes.
or a net at the bottom. And so there have been a few areas in my own life. I feel like living, and I don't mean this to be like dreary and sad, but living is such a risk. Like making a commitment to be married, being in a marriage and saying like, I'm going to be with you for the rest of my life. Like that is a risk, and trusting my everything, my health, my everything, to somebody, and not just somebody, clearly somebody I believe that God has called me to be with. But a few risks that come up for me on the personal side is the risk like that happened in childbirth, like, giving birth to our children. Childbirth can be risky, even though it's a natural occurrence. It can be risky. And my 3 kids were natural water births. And so when I think about that, like, girl, you was crazy. What was you thinking? But I did it, clearly not thinking about the risk at the time, thinking all positive. But as far as a professional side, taking the risk to leave the comfort of my 9 to 5 job, my salary, that was a beautiful, lovely salary for a single woman. And the insurance was great. My PTO was great. Who I worked with was amazing. They were giving me opportunity to climb the corporate ladder, if you will, once I became licensed. And then one day waking up and saying, when I decided to become a therapist, I said one day I wanted to have my own practice. And friends have been asking, well, when are you going to do it? And one day I said, this is the day. I'm going to do it. And I took that leap, but I very much, I'll be honest, I took that leap, took that risk with a net. And so I worked outside of my 9 to 5 and start building my private practice. And then when it came time to leave, I ensured I at least had one contract that was going to pay me as I was building my private clients. And so that is a big risk that comes to mind for me because it is the comfort of a 9 to 5 job. And one thing that I don't talk about publicly enough is that when I took that risk, my husband was unemployed. And a lot of people said like, "Oh, girl, you crazy." But, it was all God's doing. I can't like sit here and say it was all me. It was all God's doing. God was like, "It's time." And I was like, "Okay, Lord, like I trust you." And I have never looked back. Business has ebbs and flows, but there hasn't been a moment where I'm like, "Oh, shoot. I got to go back to the 9 to 5 because I don't know how I'm going to make it." Thankfully, I've had very much also had a supportive partner during this time. My husband is very supportive. But that was a big risk to take the risk to go into business on my own, but then to do it while my husband was unemployed. And so what I was losing was the comfort of the 9 to 5, losing the 401k, losing that paid time off, but then also losing insurance. And so that was a whole nother area that we had to figure out as he was searching for work and as I was working for my own company.
I mean, ballsy.
Big ones, okay?
I did not know. You're right. I've never heard you share that when you started your private practice, that your hubby was unemployed. I mean, that is just terrifying. And to choose to do that, like it happens. I was just listening actually to another podcast earlier today, and the person on there was saying before they started a new venture, they were laid off. And at the same time, their wife also lost their job.
Oh,
That's a very different
yes,
situation
yes.
than making a choice. It's the epitome of taking a risk. And I want to go back briefly because I don't know if you realize that you said it, but you said, when I was doing my water burst, I'm sure I didn't appreciate the risk at the time. Yes, you did. I do not believe for one second that this lady sitting here had not done her research,
True.
had not looked into it, had not figured out who's going to be the professional person. It wasn't just you and Kalel and in a tub in the
No,
living room.
yeah, very
Okay.
true, very
So
true.
I do not accept that. And I am calling you to the mat for that because
She's right.
I know that is the case.
She's right.
But, I appreciate you sharing that because, it kind of moving into our next question, which is really the difference between a calculated risk and a reckless one. I am not here to say that boss bitches do not ever make reckless choices and that we are not ever reckless in our risk taking because some humans are at times reckless, right? You would like to think that you're above it, that you mature. I'm personally almost 50 years old. I would like to think I'm never reckless. And I'm sure that I am sometimes in a variety of different ways, right? However, we are more often than not presented with the opportunity to take a calculated risk. And even when it's calculated, we choose not to do it. So I would love for us to kind of explore this idea of what's the difference between a calculated risk and a reckless risk, and even take it a little further. Can you turn a reckless risk into a calculated one? And so what does that look like? So would you like to start or you want me to start?
Go ahead, go for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start with calculated, right? As a reference to a calculator, which we use to do math, right? Math is very linear. It's very specific. It's very process oriented. It means that there's certain errors that you can expect not to occur. And so I think as you are approaching the risk that you are presented with, you do want to be calculated. That means researching the opportunities that might come from the risk and what possible negative things may arise if you decide to take this risk. Are you prepared to take this risk? And prepared, I think, as Mill said, mentally. Are you mentally prepared to take a risk? My sister and I often talk about this as we think about growth opportunities. And what does it mean to grow in an environment where we're relatively stable? You know, we certainly face our challenges, but we're relatively stable. So anytime we decide to buy more restaurants, that is a risk. And so how do we assess whether or not we want to do that? Are we mentally prepared for what it means to own more restaurants, which means we're further removed from our people? We're not in the restaurants as often as we typically would be. That's a mental and sometimes an emotional piece of risk taking. So you really got to be aware of if am I mentally and emotionally aware? Am I mentally and emotionally aware, prepared for that risk, right? Are you financially prepared for the risk, right? So even though Kalel was unemployed at the time, I'm going to guess, and I know you'll correct me if I'm wrong, that there was some amount of cushion that you all were able to rest upon as you ventured into your private practice while he was not currently, employed. Are you financially able to absorb potential negative consequences of taking this risk? Even if the vision of your financial stability is not where you want it to be, it doesn't mean you can't take that risk. It might mean that you need to figure out a way to make it financially viable. Are there grants or loans that you qualify for and might be able to get? Are there family members that you might want to involve in your venture and perhaps you could borrow money or from family or from friends? So it's not necessarily in this moment, do I have the financial capacity? But it's calculating, are there ways that I can make what seems to be a really great risk opportunity, a really high positive outcome risk? Can I make it feasible for myself? So mentally, physically, I'm sorry, mentally and emotionally, financially, are you physically ready? Because sometimes taking on new jobs puts a tax on your body, and so you have to make sure that you are ready and you're thinking about what physical um, impact taking this risk will have on you. Is your family ready for you to take this risk? We often hear about politicians that call a family meeting before they run for office. We're all going to be under the public scrutiny. Are we all willing to be a part of this risk that I'm taking to run for office? So, I think there are so many things that go into the calculus of making something what feels like perhaps a more safe risk. And just on the idea of, something that seems like a reckless risk, can you turn it into a calculated risk? It's hard for me to say because something that feels reckless, it almost feels like it's an impulse. It's going to happen in that moment. Do you even have time to prepare and think about all the calculations that you need to do in order to make this reckless risk a calculated risk? So I don't know if I want to commit to a yes or a no, but I'm feeling like I'm moving towards the definition of reckless means you're just going for it, you're just doing it. You're specifically not thinking about it. And so that then takes away the definition of reckless. So I don't know, with some more insight from you, I might change my mind on that. But I'm feeling like you can't really transform it. But what do you think, Mel?
I think you can transform a reckless risk. Where I'm struggling with the reckless risk, I do agree with you that the reckless risk is like we're not taking calculations, we're not doing our homework, we're not doing our research, we're just saying yes. And what is the difference in a reckless risk versus a full-on leap of faith?
Mm.
Where it's just like, I'm just gonna jump and then pray that the stairway gets built on my way down. Like, but now as I'm saying it out loud, maybe that difference is you've already previously had a conversation with God. You've already been asking or praying for the opportunity. And so now that you see it in front of you, it's like, this is it. The answer is yes. Versus maybe this wasn't on your radar, versus this, you hadn't even considered this. And you're just going to go for it and say yes. I mean, I feel like there's so much gray area there and so much that we could argue. The differences between like calculated, reckless, and just a full-on leap of faith.
Yeah. And it's an excellent point because the leap of faith, hmm, do you have to have known about it? I don't know. I feel like
Mm,
faith implies a level of not knowing,
the unknown. It does.
and
Yeah.
so yeah, I don't know. This is very enlightened thinking I think we're trying to have here. But I saying that it is a leap of faith feels somehow more comforting,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it kind of goes back to believing that no opportunity comes to you without some sort of divine or godly intervention. And so, and then I guess I don't want reckless risk taking to get a bad rap because there certainly can be those moments where you impulsively say yes and then the calculation happens.
Yes.
So maybe you've jumped and the stairway does not get built until you fall in about 50 feet, and then you're like, well, thank goodness, I was
Right.
worried for that 50 feet, but then before you hit the ground something is created that allows that fall to be in a positive place.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, and I guess at the end of the day, right, there's an infinite number of
Oh,
circumstances,
absolutely.
right? And
Absolutely.
so and the other thing is both reckless and calculated risk can both have negative
Oh,
outcomes.
absolutely. Very true.
Right?
Yeah.
So, we don't want to forget or pretend like once you've done all your prep work, it's going to be all good. Risk is about it implies an acceptance of a potentially negative outcome, right?
Right.
So I don't know. So is there a difference? Yeah, of course there is, right? What
But
is life? I don't know. I'm just
right,
kidding.
right. But so many layers. And I think that, to your point, the rabbit hole goes deep,
Yes.
and I think an important factor in it too is the individual, because what may feel like a reckless risk to you may not be to me, or what may feel like a calculated risk to you may not be to me. We may do our researches differently or have our calculations differently. um just the same as I do agree with you that like numbers don't lie, but I also think that there can be a variety of ways to solve an issue or problem. um so I mean just layers. I feel like that question number two could be a whole episode within
Absolutely.
itself. The other thing too that you said, when you said, do calculated risk or reckless risk come with negative outcomes? We could even say the same about like taking a leap of faith. While we know that the greater good is going to be good, but there are some moments in a leap of faith where you're like, ooh, this is ugly. Or,
Mhm.
ooh, this does not feel good. Or, this is uncomfortable. Or, Lord, I got $1 in my bank account. Like, what are we doing here? It can
Mhm.
be very scary moments. But in the end, being patient and staying the course till the end, when we're taking that leap of faith. And then when you made a point and you said, sometimes it's about taking that leap, or the reckless thing anyway. I think I mentioned this in a previous episode. I had a mentor that previously told me, like, if anyone offers you an opportunity that you're interested in, you want to do, say yes. And even if you don't know how to do it, say yes and then go home and figure it out. And so as you're sitting and talk, I'm like, well, is that calculated? Is that reckless? Is that leap of faith? Like, what is it?
Some combination of
Yeah.
all the things,
Right, right,
right?
right. Saying yes and figuring it out later, like that feels kind of scary. But sometimes that's what taking a risk is, which leads me to my next question. What are the fears that come up when you're faced with the risk? And then how do you manage that, or how do you move through those fears?
So I want to speak to the fear, but I feel like we've talked about this before, but just briefly touch on the exact scenario that you just raised, which is say yes and figure it out later. I think as women, we are uniquely positioned to believe that we have to calculate everything. We have to be fully prepared. We have to be all the things before we can take the risk or accept the responsibility, which I guess is what makes it feel riskier for us in a way that I think research has shown that men don't think in that same way. It doesn't feel like a risk for them because they're assuming they'll be able to figure it out. They don't feel like they need all that extra preparation. But I think that leads me to my answer to your next question, which is, what is the fear? The fear is that people are going to figure out I shouldn't have gotten that opportunity. The fear is that the imposter is actually an imposter, right? Like all the things that, you don't want people to think about you are going to somehow come to fruition and actually manifest, and then you're going to look like a fraud. You're not going to get more opportunities, that there's just going to be this massive loss. For me, it's just a baseline fear of failure. I don't want to fail. I don't want to disappoint people or let anyone down. So I think you know that the fear it's the fear of the negative outcome, right? So you in acknowledging that you're taking a risk, you're acknowledging the possibility of the negative outcome. So I think that's for me kind of where the fears are based in, that fear of failure, that fear that I'll be revealed as the imposter I sometimes think I am, which ends up sometimes being a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I think also a fear that I won't be able to rebound, that I won't have the resilience that it takes to kind of get back into the game that I've been trying to get into, etc. So, you know, I think the second part of your question is, how do you get through that fear? And I think that that's kind of the definition of the leap of faith, right? That's really where it's about defaulting back to, for me, reminding myself of my qualifications, reminding myself of what Sanford said to me, all those years ago. What have you tried to do that you failed at? And then also really grounding yourself in, is this fear based in reality? What's the worst possible outcome that could come out of this, and figuring out how to moderate, perhaps figuring out. So, perhaps you're not mortgaging your entire house, right, to start this new business. Maybe you are mortgaging some lesser amount that makes you feel like there's less of a risk of losing your house if this doesn't, come through. So, how do you moderate? I think that you overcome the fear by coming up with ways to moderate the identified possible negative outcomes.
Right.
So I guess it's also then making a list of possible negative outcomes so you can start to perhaps tackle them.
Mm.
This comes into the calculation. I'd venture to say, if you are willing to take a more reckless risk or a leap of faith, you're probably you're not as driven by fear in that moment. And how do taking the opportunity to reflect back on that once you've gotten through, how did that amount of freedom from fear make you feel?
Right.
Is
Right.
that a feeling that you want to embrace, or was it just like free fall the whole time and you're like, I never want to do that again? So, you said it already, Mel. It's about the risk taker.
Right.
It's also about the area. So, I think that I am probably willing to take more financial risks than I am willing to take like risks as it relates to, let's say, my kids' education, right? Um, some people are like, I'm not taking any financial, if it has to do with money, I'm definitely not doing it. But my kids, they'll be all right. So, they can go to whatever school they want to. It doesn't feel risky to them. Whereas I'm like, they have got to be on a specific path, and it's a risk for me to do anything outside of that. So I think your risk tolerance or risk aversion is going to vary depending upon the circumstances and from person to person,
Right.
which is why I think it's helpful to have one other way you can get past your fears for me is to have people in your life who don't share your same risk aversions, because then you're both like, we're not spending any of the money, right? My sister is more financially risk averse than I am. We balance it. I push her, she pushes me. So that to me also, it helps with overcoming some of those fears. How about you, Mel? How have you kind of dealt with your fears around taking risk and gotten through those fears?
I love your risk aversion, risk tolerance. Like that really helps to put things into perspective because even if it's calculated or risky or reckless or a leap of faith, like that like really speaks to me and that really resonates. And for the people who are completely fearless, I would love to be more fearless, you know. I would love to be freed of fear and freed of overthinking. I think that those are the two things that come up for me that may prevent me from taking some sorts of risk. And that would be great. So send us some tips.
Right. We
Send
need your
us some
tips
tips,
too.
right? But some of the things that help me are remembering the acronym that fear is false evidence appearing real. And so as you talked about doing this inventory or looking at your calculations, looking and seeing like, what if this is false that's appearing real? Like the imposter syndrome, a lot of those areas are false that's appearing real. That's our inner bully, inner critic talking trash to us to have us miss out or to not move forward with the opportunity. Um, the other thing that's really helpful for me, and it's something I teach my clients as well, is making a list, either mentally or putting it on paper. What are the things that I can control and what are the things that are out of my control? And really focusing on managing the things that I can control. Because what's out of my control, I have to ask myself, what are the reasons that I'm spending time wheeling on these things that I can't control? I can't control the weather. I can't control, all of these things. I can't control someone's budget, what their speaking budget is, but I can control on if I say yes or no to what they're offering me as a speaker. I can't control, the algorithm, but I can control the content that I put out there. And so just looking at what are the things that I can control and what are the things that I cannot, and how do I manage? How do I release the things that I can't and manage the things that I can? That comes up. And then the other one for me is a whole lot of prayer. A whole lot of prayer. A whole lot of prayer, having conversations with God, like, God, is this the one? Is this the opportunity? And sometimes I do fall into that very thing that all of us fall into, which is like, Lord, is that the sign? Can you send me another sign to make sure that's the sign? I need a signier sign than the sign. So falling into that and just really like, reminding myself, like, girl, like, stop bothering the Lord with this stuff. Like, he already told you what to do. Like, you need to get to it. And then of course also having conversations with other people, trust people that I trust, whether it's you, my husband, friends, my own therapist, because we can get stuck with having the conversation over and over and in our head, and it becomes an echo chamber because we're going to say the same thing to ourselves over and over again, but saying it out loud, sometimes you're like, oh, okay, I get it now. Or saying it out loud and getting the feedback from someone else is helpful too. And then journaling, I find that to be helpful too. And then just doing things that I can do to manage my nervous system. Because when we're living in fear, then now we may making a decision out of survival. We may be making a decision out of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And we know that those decisions that we're making in that moment are all about survival. They're not thinking long term. And so if I can manage my nervous system with breathing, with other exercises that really help to do that, with humming, that can help put me back in a position where I can make a sound decision versus one out of survival mode.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a key point. The survival mode that, you know, it's not about how can this benefit me on an ongoing basis, but what is the thing, how am I feeling? I'm anxious, I'm scared in this very moment, so I'm not going to do the thing. I think that's really excellent. And as you're making a big decision of whether or not you want to take a risk, really the other, well, let me actually say one other thing. Very oftentimes, we're presented with opportunities to take risks, and we believe that there's time pressure that there actually isn't. And I am a huge proponent of responding to an offer from someone that feels like a risk, saying, by when do you need an answer? Because that then buys you time so you don't have to be reckless. You don't have to feel pressure to say yes in the moment. You don't have to necessarily take a full leap of faith. You can really and truly take a little bit more time to digest and decide, is this the right thing for me? So never has, and the answer might be, I need a decision right now. But I cannot honestly think of a single circumstance where someone has asked me to take a risk and they've said, I need a commitment right now. I may have felt pressure to give an answer, but not because false evidence appearing real, not because the person who was asking me to take the risk imposed that immediacy that I was feeling. And so I would just strongly encourage you, if there's anything that you take from this, always ask for time. And quite honestly, if someone says, I need an answer by tomorrow, oh, I have these two things going on. Would it be possible if I got back to you in 2 days? 95% of the time, I'm going to guess someone will say, sure, no problem. Because so often, again, that sense of immediacy comes from within, not from the reality of the situation. So, strongly encourage you to do that, which I guess is probably part of my answer to our last question. What advice would you give to someone who's on the edge of a big leap but stuck in what if thinking? And so, one, the first thing I would say is if you're stuck in what if, then you at this point have had a lot of time. So you've taken up too much time. You need
Right.
to get with it, right? So I would say probably my first tip on this is if you're stuck in what if, more often than not, I think the what ifs are in your head. So get them out of your head. Either, as Mel said, what if to another person, what if to a piece of paper, what if needs to come out of your head because you don't have the answers. If you're what ifing, we can make a new verb. If you're what ifing over and over again, you're not going to be, it's going to be a spiral. And there's a good chance you're going to end up on the wrong side of the risk taking. Get that out of your head. You've spent enough time with it, so give someone else the opportunity to help you. And it could be that maybe you write it all out and then the person reads it and then you have a conversation, or you just spit it all out because you need to just get it out in that conversation. That's what I would say is probably my biggest thing is get it out of your head. And the other thing is if you're not ready to talk to someone else about it, for every what if you have, come up with an alternative. So, what if I fall on my face? What if I kill it? What if I lose all my money? What if you make 3 times what you thought you possibly could, even just considering the opportunity? And then, once you have your list of responses to the what ifs, maybe try to find one or two specific things that you can do to get yourself to that actual outcome, because that takes it out of the theoretical and it puts it very real. And as you just said, Mel, and I love this reminder that I think so many of us so often need, you can only control yourself. What are the things you can do to control those concerning what ifs and make them into positive what ifs? So I think those would be some of my tips for how you get out of the what if cycle in your head. How about you, Mel? What are your tips?
I'm loving your new word, the what ifing. If we find ourselves in the what ifing. I love the idea of putting it on paper. One thing I encourage clients to do, and I do myself, is creating a list of pros and cons. What are the pros and cons of doing it? What are the pros and cons of not doing it? And very similar to what Carrie already said, what if you fail? What if you're successful? I think it's important to be able to see it on paper because, again, it's in our head, but we aren't calculating it. When it's in our head, some of the fails may look bigger, but when we put it on paper, we realize that the wins are so much longer than that one possibility of failing on the list could ever be. And so by seeing it on paper, it's like, oh, wait, there's so many wins. There's so many reasons I should be doing it. And the only reason I shouldn't is one thing, but that one thing is weighing a lot. Like, having that evidence could be really helpful and crucial in the process. And I think also, you have to be honest with yourself or even know yourself. Am I notorious for overthinking? What have been other times that I've overthought it or overthunk it and it has been amazing? And being honest with yourself, like, oh yeah, I'm an overthinker, then that tells us this is already something that we have to battle because it's not even going to give you clarity about if the risk is a great risk for you because you're stuck in your natural default, which is to overthink. So I think managing overthinking is important. And then that's it. I just got two. I think you
Okay.
said so many great ones. I feel like maybe something else was roaring up in me, but that's it, Hatters. I just have two, which is, writing them down, looking at the pros and cons of both, and then managing our overthinking, knowing ourselves if we're an overthinker. And then the last one I'll say is using previous evidence. What have I done before, or what tools have I used to make some really big decisions for myself, and what did that look like? What's stopping me from using those same tools today to make this really big decision for myself or my business?
Yeah, you don't have to have a lot of tips.
True.
Sometimes it's one good tip that can
True.
speak to someone. So but I do think that all the three that you have said are really helpful and insightful. And, I think that I have probably tried to use some version of them over time. And a lot of this is a muscle. And so you kind of have to practice not overthinking. You have to practice getting out of your head. You have to practice because so often again you're stuck in your head. So, just really encourage you to keep in mind that risk taking, whether calculated or reckless, is something that you have to practice and get better with over time. That is really how you become a boss. So many bosses will tell you, I've taken so many risks, and, about 80 or 90% of them failed. And that's the other thing that I would say is to not get trapped in previous failures. So, in the same way that you can look back on previously positive experiences, to learn from your previous failures and not get stuck and assume I failed before, I'm going to fail again. So therefore, I'm not going to take any more risks. Don't get stuck in that. I think that's one other thing I wanted to add.
Yeah, I would agree. And I'm glad you brought up the failure piece, because that is an important factor, that we're going to fail. And once we can accept that reality that not everything in business, not everything in personal, not everything in leveling up is going to be perfect and going to be amazing. The beauty, though, when you fail, not if, when, is what you learn from it. And when we learn from it, then we can look back and be like, that really wasn't a failure. It may have been an expensive lesson. That's going to happen. It may have been an expensive lesson, rather mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, financially. But when we learn from it, those learning blocks, those stepping stools are setting us up for the most amazing comeback, or for the most amazing next level in your boss season. And so don't be afraid of the failure, but also learn from the failure. So, Hatters, thank you for being here today. Thank you for taking a risk on the Hats podcast. We took a risk, and you take a risk by showing up and giving us your time, giving us your ear. We understand as entrepreneurs and women in business that time is so valuable and you cannot get it back. But each week you take a risk. You take a risk on our episodes. You take a risk on the tips you're going to share. And we hope that they are edifying. We hope that they are nurturing, and they are providing you with whatever you need in this season. And may you continue to be bold, beautiful, and courageous, and take the most amazing risk in your season of life that's going to lead you to that next level. Thank you for being here. We appreciate you. We love you, and we tip our hats to you.
The information in this podcast is provided for general informational purposes only and should not be construed as legal, medical, or therapeutic advice. Listening to this podcast does not take the place of developing an individual relationship with a therapist or attorney. If you need help for mental health or legal issues, we strongly encourage you to find a professional in your area who can help meet your individual needs.